Meeting. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Ron Hill, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our PACEPO Wednesday webinar for February 20th. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you of a couple of upcoming Wednesday webinars next month. On March 13th, we'll host the next installment in our series of accounting seminars with Armanino. And on March 27th, Joe Bosch and Dan Freilich from D.A. Davidson & Company will join us for debt financing for independent schools. But today we're focused on best practices in hiring, or as we've been calling it, Are You Hiring Like It's 1999? We're delighted to welcome our host, Greg Martin, Upper School Dean at the Perkiomen School. He's been a boarding school educator for 23 years as a teacher, coach, and dorm parent. He holds a doctorate in educational policy from Drexel University, with his dissertation focused on the triple threat model of teacher found in boarding schools. Among others, Greg has published articles for NACE, TABS, and the Enrollment Management Association. Today's webinar is another series in Greg's book of presentations at a number of regional and national conferences on hiring, and we are delighted to welcome Greg Martin. So Greg, take it away.
Morning, everybody. I want to thank you all for coming today. I know a lot of people are working remotely because of snow days and delays and everything else. And this is a topic that I think is picking up steam. I chose the catchy title as a play on the Prince song, Time to Party Like It's 1999. It just sort of stuck with me, and I wanted to kind of keep it a little bit light and a little bit humorous. So the first thing I want you to note is if you can go up to the chat box and open the chat box, there's a survey link in the chat box. And if you click on that survey link, feel free to take it right now. It's sort of something that I like doing at conferences and when I give presentations, is survey your audience to get some real-time data from the people that are actually participating in the talk or in the presentation. So click on that link, take the link, and I'll sort of continue, or take the survey, and I'll kind of continue to talk while you guys are doing that. And then sort of at the end, what I'll do is I'll bring up the survey results, and we can get an idea of are there common areas we're seeing? You know, is there a lot of divergent? You can't see the link. Okay, let me repost it, and then I will send it out again. How about now? Okay, so I think it was once people had to log on, they should be able to see it. Does everybody have it now? Okay, see if it's working for people. Okay, so really one of the things that we need to touch base on before we get into any discussion on hiring in independent schools are the demographic changes that are occurring within the United States with regards to who is working and what's going on given generational changes that are occurring within, not only within the United States, but we see it in any sort of aging post-industrial economy like in Germany or in Japan or in other places. So first and foremost, we're seeing a massive shift kind of coming online between a big cohort of people, the baby boomer generation, born between roughly 45 and 64, and two other really large cohorts of people, Generation Y, born roughly between, I don't know, 85-ish and around 96 or so, 97. And then Generation Z, which are sort of the people that are in high school right now and about to actually head off into college. So one of the things we're seeing is your first baby boomers being born in 45, they technically began retiring in 2010. However, when you look at the birth rate during the baby boomer generation, the largest segment of births was somewhere between 1953 and 1958. So about a 5-year period of time, which means that we're coming into a time period where in theory, if we use 65 as the retirement age, we should begin seeing a massive number of people in the workforce retiring. That brings us to the question of who's replacing them and how are they different from the people that are currently occupying roles in our schools. And that's why one of the questions I asked in that survey has to do with the balance of your faculty with regard to your age breakdowns. I recently worked with a boarding school a bit, looking at some of their staffing, and over 50% of their employees were over the age of 50, which presents a very unique set of circumstances and challenges, whether it has to do with the day-to-day operations of their school, or whether it has to do with sort of, what are their plans for the next 10 years? To go with that, our employment landscape has changed. I first started teaching in 96 or something like that. And the employment landscape is unbelievably different today. We have record low unemployment rates. And obviously, if you dig down a little bit with that, that's not necessarily a good thing. You have to ask the question of what kind of jobs are people doing. But the employment market is pretty hot right now. So if you're coming out of college and you have an advanced degree, you do have some selectivity. You can be a little bit selective. You can say no to a lot of things that maybe 20 or 30 years ago you definitely would not have said no to. And that takes us to the next piece. Schools, as we all know, are they don't do change well, and they don't do change quickly. Which, when you put those two things together, schools remain this sort of traditional structure, and that's particularly the boarding school world, where the modeling, the faculty, the staffing model in boarding schools hasn't changed, that triple threat model. And in day schools, you see the similar, where the expectations for your faculty really haven't shifted a great deal in the last 20 years, 30 years or so. And that is another challenge we're seeing. That is, the baby boomer generation retires more, and we see Generation Y and Generation Z sort of taking the lead. There are some very different viewpoints about work regarding what they're willing to do, how they view a job, how long they stay at jobs, what are the things they're looking for in employment, where do they want to live, the fact that many are carrying large amounts of debt. So I'm actually going to share my screen right now, and I'm going to apologize in advance for my messy desktop, which you guys will all see when I do this. And the first thing I want to sort of draw your attention to is, let me find it. It was here a second ago. Is this report from Deloitte. If you're not familiar with Deloitte, they do a large-scale survey, employment survey, that's really, really, really robust and gives you a great deal of data that can be useful. And one of the items here, if we look at sort of the executive summary, the Deloitte survey looks at millennial and Generation Z hires, and basically who they are, what they believe in, and how that is different from generations past. And to sort of give an overview of what they're looking at, they want flexibility within their workplace. They want to have immediate input into their workplace. In other words, they don't want to show up and then have to sit around for 5 years before they're taken seriously. They want diversity within their workplace. They want a workplace that looks like the world that they've been part of. They're also looking for compensation, but the way they define compensation is not only monetary. Obviously it's important to them, but it's not just about a monetary compensation. It's about the quality of the workplace and how does the workplace compensate them outside of financial. So this is a great survey, and I'm happy to email it out to anyone, or you can dig around online. It's pretty easy to find. It's really comprehensive. It's a huge survey. Obviously, it's 32 pages of data and graphs and charts, and if you like that kind of stuff, you'll really enjoy reading through this. But that brings me to the sort of big piece here. Get us out of the way. So this is the big piece that I want to take a look at. Finding new faculty members, and as you hire in your independent schools, it used to be much less formal. It used to be more personal, where contacts from within, you know somebody who has an English degree and you pull them on to teach at your school. It was less impacted by parental expectations where, the older generations, I mean, when I was a student and I attended Petty in New Jersey, your parents dropped you off and they sort of left the school to take care of what it needed to take care of. And new hires, the baseline for hiring, were, a lot of your independent school teachers were products of independent school teachers, or a product of independent schools, whether it was day or boarding. They attended an independent school, they went off to a liberal arts college, and they returned to teach at independent schools. And within the boarding world, triple threats, the people that teach, that coach, that do dorm duty, were the norm. And hyper specialization, where getting really focused on one thing and you get really good at one thing and everything else falls by the wayside, was not the rule of the day. The hiring matrix was less complex. There were fewer boxes to check, whether it's at a day school where you're hiring a history teacher and they teach history, and now you need a history teacher who also can teach AP Econ, who also can run the Youth and Government program or the Model UN, and maybe they can also coach soccer. And that's even more so in the boarding world, given the numerous sort of job responsibilities there. So there are three primary areas of challenge for any school. Organizational, and that's that internal structure and function of your school. Then there's the parental challenge, the increasing expectations that I'll get to in a minute. And then there's the employee challenge. So these are sort of triangulating into some really interesting times for schools with regard to who you hire, how do you attract them, how do you identify them, how do you retain them and keep them on your staff. So from an organizational standpoint, schools are expected to hire experts. The days of having a nice little undergraduate degree from a good school, it's becoming harder to justify for schools given the price tag that the parents are paying. As well, schools have fixed resources with regard to tuition. If you're a tuition-driven school and 85% of your revenue is coming from your tuition, your ability to hire and pay experts just simply isn't there. And part of this goes into the idea that schools are struggling to define the value-added component of attending an independent school, whether it's a day school or a boarding school, the proliferation of other sort of advantages for public schools that have improved, or charter schools, those sort of challenges or those sort of competition that didn't exist 25 years ago is adding to it. Schools are not nimble, we know that, in reacting to cultural changes that impact employer-employee dynamics. Schools don't do that very well, never have, but that's something that needs to be addressed. And as I started off this presentation, schools are facing growing rates of retirements among baby boomer employees. And the idea that you're simply just going to replace one for one is not really all that accurate. On the parental side, parents are demanding more for their dollar. They simply they want experts. They want expert teachers. They want expert coaches. They want, expert directors for the play. And they want people that are really well-versed in pastoral care if they're going to be dorm parents. And that's something that is really challenging for schools. Parents are stressed. They're unsure. And what happens is this anxiety passes through to the children, and ultimately the schools feel that pressure with regard to trying to hire people that are within budget, but that the parents are going to really be excited about and feel good about. And as I said earlier, parents see that premium price tag, and they expect a premium product with regard to who is educating their children. Then we get down to the sort of last box here, and that's the Generation Y, Millennials, and Generation Z have very different circumstances from Boomers and Generation X. And I sort of leave Generation X out of it, even though I'm a member of that cohort. Generation X is not a very large cohort. We don't make up a very big percentage of the sort of working population. But the Boomers and Gen X have very different viewpoints and very different experiences. If you're a Boomer, you grew up during a time of unbelievable prosperity in the United States. You were pre-technology. If you're Generation X, you grew up during a very sort of tumultuous time, end of the Cold War, changing sort of global circumstances. You became sort of tech immigrants, digital immigrants. But Generation Y and Generation Z, they see work and jobs as something you do as part of your life. They're less willing to sort of give everything to a workplace. And that's important to understand, especially within the boarding school world, where that is the expectation, that you come teach at a boarding school and it becomes pretty much your life. We don't see Generation Y and Generation Z viewing jobs, specific jobs, as permanent. The idea of you get a job right out of college and you stay at said place for 35 years or what have you, that's not happening. And the data supports the idea that most of your younger employees are staying less than 3 years in a job. And some of the most recent data actually is pointing to less than that. So if you're hiring younger teachers to come in and be part of your organization, the reality is you might be doing that more often. And that affects your sort of institutional culture and your institutional memory and the sort of perceived stability of your school. Whether that's right or wrong, it's significant. Debt. $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt. About $1.3 trillion of that is in the federal student loans. And, people are coming out with advanced degrees and $35, $45, $50, $100, $200,000 in student loan debt. And that's really impacting everything from the jobs they choose to the ability to get a mortgage, because all that debt factors in when the banks look at their ability to afford a mortgage. It drives where people are going to live. It decides whether you're going to have two people working or one person working. It basically dictates a great deal for your younger generations. That Generation X and the boomer generation, this really wasn't part of the conversation. So this is the inflection point. I'm going to sort of leave this up for just a second for people to take a look at, because this gives some, examples, but also some advice. And this is where schools are trapped. And I'm not necessarily using the word trapped as a negative, but it's a situation where schools are finding themselves between parents' organizational limits and this new workforce that has a very different viewpoint regarding work, jobs, work-life balance, and what they think is important. So hiring essentially needs to become more adaptive, flexible, and ultimately creative. We can't continue to try to do things like we did in 1999. We can't continue to try to do, quote, the wrong things righter. And that means schools need to really look at how you're deploying your faculty. What are you asking them to do? And are you asking people to do things that they're not necessarily good at or don't believe in, just because that's the way you've always done it? And this is difficult because it's time intensive. It takes a lot of shuffling. It takes a lot of those hard conversations about the equity of workload or perceived equity of workload in schools. Am I teaching more students than the person across the hall? Is my job harder? And those are challenging. As well, roles need to be redefined. Do we have a structure in place that allows younger employees to take on leadership positions? Is there a situation where maybe you're not hiring people to teach, coach, and do dorm duty if you're a boarding school, but you're hiring someone to teach and they're going to teach more and do less somewhere else? Or with a day school, are there options on the table for a teacher to teach more courses in lieu of leading an after-school activity or something of that nature? And these are all the conversations that are sort of ongoing. And different schools, we're independent schools, so we approach things independently. And what works at one school might be a complete disaster at another. So it's hard to have a uniform blanket response, given the sort of independent nature of schools and individual sort of situations that all schools are in. These are a few articles. I'm actually going to pull them up on the screen for you to get a look at. This is one that I wrote in 2016 that really looks at the model of the triple threat being under pressure. And this is directly taken from my dissertation and then some follow-up research I did for NAIS. So that's one. And I'm sure Aggie will send out this PowerPoint as part of it. I can include that in. And this is the second one that I did last fall, and it has to do with hiring in Gen Z and the millennial generation, and a lot of it relies on that Deloitte survey study that I shared with you. And then finally, this and the idea of marketing the multi-talented faculty member at schools, and why that's important to really publicize that to your family, of why we have great people working at independent schools and what that looks like. So I'm going to bring this back out now. Were people able to take the survey? And I think I can unmute if I'm correct here. Does anybody have anything they want to interject? Because one of my goals for this presentation was not just me rambling on about data and the challenges that independent schools are facing in hiring. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to pull up some of the survey data to share. But I would love it if some people would chime in, and maybe we can unmute people to do so, to sort of get a sense of what are you seeing at your school, and maybe how are you adapting to any challenges that are coming up.
Hey, Greg, you talked a little bit about the fact that we have a large number of baby boomers about to retire. And
Right.
that's at one end of the spectrum. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have, millennials and Gen Z who are coming to our schools and spending 2 or 3 years because, quite honestly, in a lot of schools, they're not feeling the love
Right.
from more veteran employees. So how do we make the culture more accepting of these new folks who are coming in, and reassure veterans that their position as veterans in the community are not subverted in any way by these young people who have new ideas and thoughts about leadership and things like that, that it's all a good thing and that everybody has a part to play?
I mean, I think that's a great question. And it really comes down to leadership. That has to come from the top. The leadership in a school needs to be clear about what the role of new faculty are, that things have changed, that, new faculty coming in have relevant ideas. And that's one of those bridge and buffer problems. How do you have those conversations with your veteran faculty member who's been at the school for 35 years and remembers the way it was back in whenever year, who feels maybe put out by a younger faculty member who's saying, hey, let's do this. As well, you have those younger faculty members that come to a school and at their first faculty meeting find that the older faculty don't want them to speak. And I've seen that firsthand. So that's really on the leadership of the school, whether it's the head or the division leader or a combination, to sort of have those conversations about how things have indeed shifted. And it's sort of a balancing act of looking towards the future while honoring the work and the value that your veteran teachers bring to the organization. So that's very much a management leadership piece.
And then throw some, board meddling into it. And then you've got a head who's out the door in a year and a half because he or she,
right,
took on the veteran faculty members.
Yeah. Or you run into a situation where you have a board that is, institutionally old. So they've been around for a while. That they want the school to be the way it was when their kid attended in 1985, and you're not getting support as a head from the board in making some of those changes. So that's another piece to that puzzle. How healthy is your board? How forward thinking is your board?
Hey, Greg, this is Matt Evans. I'm the head of school at a preschool through 8 school down the city. Come up with an interesting situation that we're starting to have some candidates that have a different path to the experience that they have than just high school, independent or public, off to a liberal arts college, and then kind of applying to want to work as an elementary school teacher. Otherwise, we do have some teachers who have less academic experience, but more sort of just personal experience and more classroom experience and more experience doing things with kids. So we've started to look at it in a different way. We even had a teacher candidate who is 27, doesn't have a degree, but is amazing with kids and has done a lot of work since they were 18 or 19 in different situations with children. So we're wondering if that's going to change with these kind of micro degrees and some of the other graduate degrees and experiential degrees that people have, that it's not just going to be a BA in history from Dartmouth that then they come down and say, hey, I've got $200,000 worth of debt, but I also have a lot of experience, or I've had this typical educational experience that was more like what it was in 1999, or certainly when I got out of college. Just see if you see that, or if you could address any questions or things that you've seen in your research.
I mean, I think schools are going to have to react to that sort of that change that is occurring, where you're having people that are dynamic, that have great experience levels, that can add a great deal of value to your organization, to your school, but might not have that traditional, I went to Gettysburg and have a degree in history sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the hardest part of that is, how do you sell that to parents as being okay?
Yeah.
Right. That's the hard part. How do you say to a parent who's paying X number of dollars to have their child attend your independent school, that the person working with them doesn't have a college degree? Right. That's the hard part. The kids don't care. Right. The kids don't care. The kids want to have a good experience. And if they're having a good experience with someone with a PhD, or someone with micro credentials, or a ton of experience in Outward Bound or Knowles or something like that. So how do you package that and market it to parents? And I think allaying the anxiety that parents have is key to that. And as the sort of the college model shifts, that everyone goes to college model is definitely not for the long term. That might become more accepted as we see that shift in higher education, where we do see the micro credentials and we do see the alternative paths to employment become more normal, and then it becomes okay for parents. But that's the challenge.
Yeah, and I agree. There's definitely maybe we're on the front end of it because we haven't had as many people that have come from that path. But it seems more likely that if you can get micro credentials, micro degrees, and all these other things, that the more experiential education of teaching and of working with children and having that background and having those great recs and being really great teachers, great employees. That's the hard part, is that we don't want to let this person go, but we realize, but they don't have a degree. They've been in our after school program and so it's a good point of how to sell it to the parents. And so far they don't know that he doesn't have a degree. So in some cases we're just gonna let that happen.
Which that presents another problem, because what happens if and when they find out, and how will they react to that? So having a plan for that is probably important. But I'll use my oldest son. He finished a couple of years of college and found that he already had a job in the field he was going to college for.
Right.
So why continue to be out of the workplace and not making money and accumulating debt at the same time? So he works for Department of Children and Family in another state. He leads outdoor education for at-risk youth, and he's great at it and he loves it. But if he were to apply to an independent school, most independent schools wouldn't even look at him because he doesn't have a degree, although he has more than enough experience and would be great. So how do we sort of turn that corner?
Well, if he wants to move to the city, have him give me a call.
Will do. Anybody else seeing anything at your school? I'm looking at the time. We're at 10:29 right now. What's happening at your individual organizations that might be important for us all to hear about, or a question?
Hi, my name is Sarah Evans.
I think there's someone speaking and I can't hear them. Yeah, I'm hearing someone trying to speak and they can't. I can't hear them very well.
I'll recommend that you use the chat box to type your question. We can see that we work.
Yeah. So I'm going to pull up the survey while we sort of get through that. And I'm going to try to see the results of the survey as we go through, if SurveyMonkey will allow me. And I'm going to share this with everybody so you can all see. Let me get back to this and share screen. Yeah. So here we are. These are the results. You know, day school dominant. Some of you have a boarding population. Right? Most of you are shading over 40. There's a big percentage, 50% are shading over 40, which, I used to think 40 was old, and now 40 is, I wish I were 40. So this is something to look at. If you have that age balance, you sort of are able to have your young, fresh out of college, 23-year-old, you have your sort of 30-somethings, they might have families, and then you have your sort of more veteran faculty members. That's a good blend, because you can have those sort of healthy conversations about what's different, what are the strengths and weaknesses of each age group. They bring different things to the table. The 23-year-old has all that energy, and the 55-year-old has all that experience. So how do you sort of make those a great combination for your school? And this is an interesting response. We're split, right? We're split. And this might have to do with the nature of your specific school. So for example, down in the city, your K through whatever, K through 6 or K through 8 school versus a larger, maybe, K through 12 or a 9 through 12 school. This is what we're seeing, right? And again, look at this split. It's even. So the schools that are seeing younger employees stay, more than 5 years, what are you doing to do that? That would be the question. Is it who you're hiring, or is it your organizational structure, or is it your location? I know some schools, especially, boarding schools up in like Maine, how do you get a 25-year-old to stay there, right? That's one of the challenges. Or if you're in an urban area, how do you get a 25-year-old to stay there with regard to rent, right? Again, a split. Some of you are seeing those increased parental expectations. I will note that within the boarding world, when I run this survey at the TABS conference, it was agree, like 98%. So maybe it's a little bit of a different organizational model we're seeing, right? So we could say that this is pretty clear, right? Most of you are seeing this as a problem, and I'm seeing questions pop up in the box, and I'm going to get to that in one moment. Right? And this is a challenge. How do you compete with the private sector for salary when your income, when your revenue is limited to tuition or endowment or other campus programs that are going to bring some revenue in? How do you compete? If you're a person that's experienced in AI, and companies are going to snap you up and pay you 6 digits, whereas a school is going to snap you up and pay you less than 6 digits. So competing with that, and that's that point I made about what are some other maybe creative things that a school can do to say, hey, look, we can't pay you what a corporate position would pay you, but here are the other things we offer. Marketing that lifestyle of being an educator, I think, is a really key thing for schools to be looking at. Yeah, so there's no plan. I think that's probably the easiest way to put it. And I would highly advise schools to really look at your faculty population and ask the question, what do we do when these people retire, and how are we approaching it? Does it free up salary? Does it free up maybe sunsetting programs or positions that are sort of outdated and irrelevant? Is there a way that we could turn retirements into a positive move for the school? Would this be a good time to redo our organizational chart? Would this be a good time to launch a new campaign? Would it be a good time to sort of revise our mission statement? So there are ways that retirement of a large portion of your boomer population can actually be a positive in sort of goosing things along. And yeah, I mean, this is kind of, unless you're a very wealthy school, I mean, Phillips Exeter Academy, does not have a problem with this. They'll go hire the best people they can find and pay them whatever they need to pay them to keep them there. But most schools are not in that sort of situation. Okay. And this is another interesting response. You know, just because you're in a city doesn't make it great for younger or even older faculty members. Because obviously what we've been seeing is, you know, if you live in San Francisco and you make $100,000 a year, you can't find a place to live, which is insane. Likewise, if you are in rural Bucks County, that location could be a challenge as well. So I'm going to actually stop sharing and come back to some of the questions. So Gail said, with the issue of hiring good people without degrees but relevant experience, any thoughts on how to handle compensation? We tend to pay more for degrees and advanced degrees. Yeah, it changes your compensation model because you essentially have to monetize experience. You have to give a value to experience. And putting a price tag on that is difficult. I don't really know what that would be, how you would do that. You know, do you look at CEUs? Do you look at certifications that they might possess and tag it to that? And that's a great question. I'm going to kick it over to Aggie because I know we're 6 minutes past where we want to be on this. So I'm going to kick it over to Aggie and Ron.
That's no problem. If folks still have questions, we're happy to stand a little longer. But Greg, what are 3 things that schools can do right now to do better in their hiring and stop hiring like it's 1999?
First, I would do a complete review of your staff. Who do you have? How are you compensating them? And sort of basically what's going on in your organization. Secondly, I would be open to looking at sort of faculty roles and revising them so that not everyone necessarily does the same thing as everyone else. How many courses you teach, how many activities, and the like. And I think the third thing is I would get a little bit more, I would spend more time closely getting to know the career offices at some colleges that are close to your school, maybe create a direct pipeline from those colleges to your organization, and also maybe start really looking at graduates of Teach for America, people that have some of the competencies and backgrounds maybe from Knowles or Outward Bound that you might want in your organization. And again, that differs from place to place depending on what your mission is. Flexibility, I think, is the word.
Well, it's a good thing. It's a good thing that you guys are all members of Pays Boa, because we can really support you in all 3 of these things. We have a relationship with Fisher and Phillips, which is a firm that specializes in employee relations, and we have a ton of resources from them on their website for job descriptions and things like that. And also, as HR professionals and heads of school and business officers, we have HR2 coming up, HR Day 2 coming up, where we can talk about just about anything you need to do that's HR related. And then the other thing that Pays Boa is doing is we have a relationship with SEPCHI, the Southeastern Pennsylvania Higher Education Association, and we are working with them to develop a pipeline of, students who are graduating who can, come and work in our schools, but also provide professional development opportunities for our own faculty at potentially reduced rates. So for all of you who hire teachers who have to be certified at the elementary level, we're trying to work with SEPCHI to provide some programming so that they can retain their certification. And that's something that we didn't touch on, because for a while, folks were wanting to hire people with certification from the state of Pennsylvania, but providing them in no way to keep up that certification. So we're trying to help there.
And I think these conversations are all great, and they're happening in silos. And I think getting more people together into a room to have a bigger conversation, to share ideas, to share sort of challenges, I think that's a really important thing. And NAIS is writing a lot about hiring, and Tabs is about to launch something with regard to hiring as well.
Great. Yeah, that's going to be a big job in the next 5 years or so.
Yeah. Yep. I agree. Well, I'm going to kick it back over to Ron. I don't know whether he's still available.
I am still here. Absolutely. We haven't gone anywhere. Yeah. So if we have no further questions, and if any has any concluding thoughts, we'd love to have you either type them in the chat box or, give a shout out here. Otherwise, we're at about our 40-minute mark, which is what we like to stay with. And we don't want to take your time, although it is hopefully most of us on a snow day. So what else do we have to do? But if there's nothing else going on, we'd like to thank you for participating. And Greg, we can't thank you enough for your participation as well.
Yeah, I appreciate having everybody come on a snow day, and I appreciate the opportunity. And if anybody wants to reach out, you can reach me at gmartin@perkiomen.org. Or I'm sure, Aggie and Ron can share my contact information if you want to continue the conversation. I'd be happy to share the slides and other resources. I can put them in an email.
Greg, you can send them over to us, and then we'll post that on our site, and also a copy of this conversation. So, if anyone else in your schools would like to, revisit the conversation, that would be great. It'll be on our YouTube channel, and we'll publicize that as well. So, so I'd like to thank you again for your participation, and also to Greg for his sharing of information that's pretty important these days. So thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will talk to you all very soon. Take care.
Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thanks again. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.